Again, welcome to Mill Creek. My name's Matt. This is our saw pit and sawmill demonstration. Out of curiosity, have any of you folks been to Mill Creek before? No? How about Colonial Michilimackinac over in Mackinac City?
Yep.
Been there? Excellent. Fort Mackinac over on the island?
Yep.
Yeah, you guys? Okay, all right. Well, we like to use Mill Creek sort of as the connecting point between those two sites because it was sort of in operation during both of those eras. When you folks, when you were at Colonial Michilimackinac, when you folks go, and I hope you do because it's a fascinating place, you'll see that fort is built entirely out of wood, out of lumber. And they would have been getting that lumber from the surrounding forests, of course, by hand, which is a long, slow, arduous process. But Fort Michilimackinac had time to wait. They had 65 years to build up in size. Initially started out about 1715 as a French fur trading outpost, taken over by the British in the early 1760s towards the end of the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War as most people know it. And then it was moved over to Mackinac Island starting in the winter of 1779 through into 1781. So about 65 years it was there, where our reproduction fort is in Mackinac City. And for that time, more and more people are moving to the area, more and more people are becoming involved in the fur trade. And so by the time they moved the fort and the accompanying village over to Mackinac Island, the population has grown to about 3,000 people. And so all of those people need buildings, right? They need houses, they need warehouses, they need places to do their business, etc. And so they would have been sending out what are called wood cutting details, and essentially clear cutting the forest of every usable tree, both for lumber and for firewood. And they would have cleared about 7 or 8 miles in all directions from the fort. This whole area would have been completely deforested and open fields. To look at this forest now, you'd think it had been here forever, but it's actually quite young as far as forests go. It's only a little bit over 100 years old. And how they're getting that lumber, they're using a variety of tools. The first and arguably most important is this tool right here. This is called a felling axe. This is designed to fell trees or to chop down trees. Has a nice big heavy head so that you build up lots of momentum as you swing it. It's got bevels on both sides of the blade so that when you connect with that tree, you dig deeply, you can chop that tree down quickly. Once the tree is on the ground, you would limb it, which is to chop off all the limbs and branches that you don't want, hook it up to a beast of burden, a horse or oxen or whatever you happen to have, and drag it back to a work site that would have looked something like this. Once at that work site, the first thing you want to do is get the log up off the ground. You don't want to be digging your axe heads and other tools through the dirt. You'll very quickly dull them, you hit them on a rock and chip them or break them entirely. So they would put their logs up on these. These are called saddle blocks. That's just a block of wood, though oftentimes it would have a groove or a notch cut into it to better support the log. Then they would stand on top of the log and begin to shape it. I don't know about you folks, but standing on top of a round log and swinging an axe between my legs doesn't exactly sound like a good idea. Fortunately, the people here had another tool to help them. That is this right here. You folks know what this is, or perhaps what it resembles in modern life? Think office supplies. A staple, right. This is called a log dog or a saddle dog. Dog in this case refers to any type of fastener. You'd hammer one end into the saddle block, one end into the log. Do that at both ends and you've effectively stapled those logs together and created a stable working platform. I've already done that to the log behind me. I've got one here and one down here. And so with those in place, I can take my felling axe one more time, climb up on top of the log I'm working on. You can see it's nice and stable, not going to go anywhere, and begin to make notches every few inches down the length of the log. I do this in order to loosen up the bark and the plant fibers underneath, like so. I'm going to make this just a little bit short. Do that down the entire length of the log. Then a second person would come behind the first with this tool here. Now this axe has a nice big broad head. Can anyone guess what this is called?
Shaver?
A broad axe.
Oh.
Axes have very simple naming schemes. This one is a little bit different from my felling axe. Of course, it has the big broad head, excuse me, that's only beveled on one side of the blade. The back side is completely flat all the way to the edge. This makes it work much like a giant chisel to cleave away the bark and shape the log. You also may notice that my handle is not quite straight. It's got a slight curve to it. This is actually a safety feature. This is designed so that as you are shaping the log, the curved handle keeps your hands away from it so that you don't hurt yourself. If it had a straight handle, you'd probably whack one or more knuckles against the side of the log, and that's a good way to break one or more fingers. So the second person would be coming along behind the first and shaping the log. This one is going to be a pain because I've got this nice large knot. Well, we'll give it a shot. Might have to come back to this one later.
You can do it.
Let's cheer him on, guys. Might try taking this in second. Try something different here. All right, that's enough of that. I got it started. I'll come back later and clean that up. So they'd run the flat surface down the entire length of the log, flip it, do it again, flip it, do it again, until they're left with a square beam much like this one here. Now these square beams are great for the support structure of your building, the load-bearing aspects. But in order to finish the building, you need boards. To make boards, you need a saw. And here at Mill Creek, we would have been using the two-man pit saw. Now I have my saw up here on these saw horses, which would have been used. These are very easy to move from job site to job site, so if you're only going to be at one spot for a couple of days, you'd use these. But they have a number of drawbacks that are very easy to overcome. First is you don't want to be sawing through the sawhorse. Somebody's going to be standing on top of that thing, and they're not going to appreciate it if it comes apart. They come tumbling down with a saw in their hands. Second is you have to figure out a way to get these big heavy beams up onto the sawhorse in the first place, which could require several people. Excuse me. It's much easier instead to go the opposite direction and dig a large hole or pit, hence pit saw, put a person down in the pit, roll the beam over top, and do all your work at ground level. The person at the top is called the tiller man. And the tiller man has the majority of the responsibility. Just like the tiller man on a ship steers a ship, the tiller man of the saw steers the saw. It's their job to make sure they cut a nice straight board. The person at the bottom is called the pit man, and the pit man does the majority of the work. Now it's a two-person saw, but if you look at the teeth of the saw, they're angled downwards. So the only time it's really cutting is when the pit man is pulling down. Now the pit man did not have a fun job at all. They'd be down in that pit, it'd be hot, it'd be sweaty, sawdust is constantly raining down and caking them from head to toe. It was not fun. Have you folks ever heard the expression, my job is the pits? Mm-hmm. Terrible, dirty, rotten job. We believe that came from the pitman. Now fortunately, for me, I don't have to be the pitman for you folks today. For that, I'm going to request a volunteer. Come on in, hop the fence. What's your name? Malachi? Okay. I will clamber on top of this thing and act as the tiller man. Pick it up, grab those handles, and pull it out.
Pull it out, Malachi.
And then go all the way to the end over here. Fast cut. There you go. Now don't go too fast and throw me off. Are you ready? Yeah. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Good. Out in the middle. Excellent. Give Malachi a round of applause. He did an excellent job. Two people working in this fashion were expected to cut on average of about 12 boards a day. That works out to a board every 45 minutes to an hour or so. At that pace, it would take us about 10 days to cut enough lumber to build this workshop here. A long, slow, arduous process. But again, Fort Michilimackinac had time to wait, 65 years to build up in size. However, after they moved the fort over to the island, and especially when the Americans took over that fort in 1796, they needed lumber, and they needed it now. If any of you folks have any questions about anything I've said or shown you here before we head over to the sawmill and I show you how much more efficient that was? No, everybody's good. All right, we'll head on over there. All right, so this is our reproduction of what the sawmill here at Mill Creek was most likely like. Unfortunately, we don't know for sure because in the 1880s, the railroad came through here and quarried Mill Creek for limestone fill. And when they did that, they destroyed whatever was left of the original mill. But this is an accurate representation of what mills of the time period looked like and how they operated. The original mill was built by a man named Robert Campbell about 1790 or so. He operated it until his death in 1808 when he left it to his heirs, his children. They continued to run the mill until about 1819, which is when they sold it to a man named Michael Dousman. Dousman was one of the first big businessmen in the Straits area. And he operated the mill until about 1840, which is when they shut it down for the simple fact that there were no trees left. They had completely deforested this entire area. They're having to go several miles to get fresh trees. So they shut the mill down about 1840. About 1845, the milling operation moves down to Sheboygan along the Sheboygan River, which is a nice big wide fast-flowing river where you can build several sawmills, and there's still plenty of trees. So how this works, you folks saw my pond out there. Think of that as the battery. Right, a stored energy. You saw the sluiceway, which connects the pond to the mill. Think of that as the wire. And the mill itself is the motor. So I will raise the gate, allow water to flow from the pond down the sluiceway, and that will fill up a crib that's underneath the floorboards right here. It's about 6 feet long by 4 feet wide by 10 feet deep, holds roughly 1,800 gallons of water, at the bottom of which is a valve, which I shall open with this flywheel here, allowing all of that water to rush down onto what's called the flutter wheel. It's a great big paddle boat looking wheel directly below me. That is the main power of the mill. And that converts that stored potential energy into usable kinetic energy. Attached to the flutter wheel is a vertical shaft called the pitman's arm, which does the same job Malachi did at our saw pit demonstration, makes my saw blade go up and down. So that's good. We need the saw blade to go up and down. What we also need is a way to feed the log into the saw. That is achieved via the ratcheting arm system above me here. As the pitman's arm forces my saw blade up and down, that makes this beam teeter up and down. Which makes this beam, which is rounded off at both ends, attached to this short rocker arm, rock back and forth. Which makes my pusher arm go forwards and backwards. When I drop this lever, the pusher arm falls onto my rag wheel and pushes that forwards. The rag wheel is connected to a horizontal axle with teeth that mesh with the teeth on my carriage, advancing the whole carriage forward. So that's good. We need the log to move into the saw. What we also need is a way to reverse the process so that when we're finished with the cut, we can back the log up, shift it, and cut again. Particularly because right now I'm in the process of squaring this up into a beam, but once I get it square, we'll start cutting boards. when we start cutting boards, we won't cut all the way to the end of the log. We'll leave about 4 or 6 inches still connected at one end and create one of these. This is called a stub shot. This is the end of the log that hasn't been sawn through all the way. We do this because it's much easier to transport 10 or 12 boards that are all connected together at one end than it is to individually carry each board wherever you need them to be. Once they've created a few of those, they would take their raft shackles, hammer one end into one log, one end into the next, into the next, into the next, into the next. Then they'd be hooked up to that beast of burden, that horse or oxen, dragged down to the beach, where they would be towed behind a ship over to Mackinac Island, and a worker could take a handsaw, saw the boards loose, and there they've got 10 or 12 boards all ready to go. In order to actually make that, I'll shut off the flow of water to the saw blade, since we're not cutting anything. There's no sense in wasting water making the saw go up and down. I'll throw this lever here, which will engage the lantern gear, which you guys probably can't see. It's down here. It kind of looks like an old railroad lantern, almost. That will mesh with the wooden teeth on the side of my rag wheel. Then I'll pull this lever and allow water to flow down onto what's called the tub wheel, or turbine wheel, that will spin the rag wheel in the opposite direction and reverse the whole process. Complicated, I know. Any questions about any of that before I get her started? No, everybody's good, alrighty. First thing I'm going to do is wave my magic fingers and push a magic button that Robert Campbell wished he had. Raise the gate, allow water to flow from the pond down the sluiceway, and fill up the crib underneath your feet. It'll take it a minute to fill up. 1,800 gallons is a lot of water. You'll hear it overflow. There's the sluiceway overflowing. There's the crib overflowing. Now I'll start the mill. That overflow. Now I'll engage the lantern gear, allow water onto the tub wheel, and reverse the process. This mill, operating on a good spring day with spring snowmelt and rainfall when they can cut all day long, was capable of cutting between 100 and 150 boards a day. So it's at least 10 times as fast as the two-person pit saw, which we demonstrated earlier.
So when was the end of their workday?
Whenever they ran out of water. So on the ideal times for cutting would have been in the springtime. With spring snowmelt and rainfall, they cut all day long. And that's when they're going. They're sawing just as fast as they possibly could in the spring. In the summer times, when there's not as much rain, it's a lot drier, there's not as much water coming down the creek, they'd only be able to cut for maybe a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours a day.
Really?
And then they would have to stop and wait all the rest of the day and all of that next night for the pond to refill, and then cut another 2 or 3 hours the next day. So springtime was when they were busy. Cutting it just as long as they possibly could. They would stock up logs in the fall and the winter time, and as soon as the ice broke, they were off to the races, just as fast as they could.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.